Alright, I guess we're just gonna go and see if this works. Because I don't know what... I don't know what that means. So I'm testing the volume of this, I'm testing the sound. Let's see what happens. We're just gonna go and see if this works. Because I don't know what... I don't know what that means. So I'm testing the volume of this, I'm testing the sound. Yeah, I can hear myself. I'm definitely there. I definitely exist. I'm going to mute this and go over to the slideshow. And we will be beginning in just a moment. Let's see. Anything else I should do before I start? Probably get my phone off the charger and get it off the desk so it doesn't really go to class. That's probably a good idea. Probably turn this thing off so it doesn't keep blasting hot air at me during the class. Not that I mind the hot air, it's pretty cold out. Okay, let's see. Sorry for that delay. It got really cold last night and I got real sick. So let's see. Key bounce, you should attend the class on HTML. That's what you should do. You should attend the HTML class. That's what you should do. My audio stream is echoey. What do you mean it's echoey? Is it still echoey? You're in the voice. You can just tell.
I mean it sounds a little it doesn't sound smooth and clear. It sounds like I'm hearing either echoing noises or some type of mouth noise as you're speaking, I guess.
You hear some kind of noise that is not my noise. I don't know what to do about that. I mean, it's the microphone that's built into my webcam. I don't know what to tell you. Is it audible? Can you hear me? Can you follow along anyway?
Will do my best to follow along.
Okay, well, you can hear me on the YouTube video, right? People can hear me on the YouTube video. It's not like, oh, you know, this is entirely unhearable, right? Like,
I don't know. I will get off Discord and check YouTube.
Well, Grecius is there. I can believe that key bounce is louder. You know what I should do? Here, I'll turn my my microphone up. I'll turn the desktop down. Here's this troubleshooting at the beginning of the class. That's how we begin the class, with troubleshooting. Now, other people should be softer than me. They should be like 25 decibels softer. So they should be like 20% softer, yeah. So that should do it. I'm gonna go with that. I can believe that key bounce was louder. Now I can believe that it is not louder. Alright, so closing that up. That is muted. Closing that up. And here we are. 25 minutes after the scheduled start time. Oh, I should start the little event thingy on the server. Start. Okay. That's how it's gonna have to be. I mean, it might be a little soft, but as long as you can hear me, you can hear me. You know what I mean? So we're gonna start with the slideshow. Welcome to the Optimalverse class series on computer science. This is the second one of these courses, and it is Web Development Part 2. How to create professional page layouts and interactivities. You do not need to have seen the previous one, which I probably will redo at some point because of the hurricane stuff that threw it off so badly. You do not need to see the first one for this. You can still be able to follow along. But other than that, the idea of this class is that by the end of today's class, you should have a solid enough understanding of how to make an interactive web page that you can build your own little portfolio, and then from there maybe you can start developing, very basic desktop apps or web apps in JavaScript. Because remember, one of the main goals of these courses is that you'll be able to not only communicate through HTML type protocols, but be able to program actual project level programs. And this is the introductory part of that through JavaScript, which is easy to use. So before we start talking about getting into the class today, I wanted to start with another quick lecture. And this one's going to be on learning how to program, because I see that there's a lot of problems with people trying to learn how to program, not necessarily understanding from the perspective of someone who's learned to program and worked on project level stuff and worked in industry and knows how to teach industry level. So I wanted to talk from that perspective for a bit about, sort of the problem that I'm seeing in a lot of teaching, especially at the university level, and the solution that I have to it in this different sort of thought about teaching that you see in a lot of classes. The first thing you need to know is that there's a misconceived notion about how you learn how to program in the first place. Learning to program isn't about learning a specific language like JavaScript or C++. It doesn't really matter what language your first language is, even though, maybe I'd recommend Python or JavaScript simply because Python teaches you good habits and JavaScript is so easy to utilize in terms of debugging. But it really doesn't matter. You could learn in any language, because in the field you would be asked to learn different languages as you went along. It doesn't matter how to do specific tasks. Tasks, there are infinite numbers of problems. There's an infinite number of problems that you're going to be having to solve in programming. It's impossible for any one teacher to teach you every one of those problems. So we're not going to learn about how to do specific tasks. I'm not trying to focus on that. And facts about the computer are useful. Knowing the RAM and all that, what those all do, is useful, but it doesn't really teach you what you need to do. So basically, this is not a spectator activity. You can't learn this by observation, and you can't learn by just me making examples that you copy. So I would encourage you guys, when I give you examples, to maybe play around with them and try and figure out what the underlying stuff is, because I'm trying to teach you the underlying methods. Because right here, we're trying to learn how to learn in general. Because the language is going to be the same and every problem is going to be unique. And learning to program is about getting those skills that apply regardless of the language or task. You need to learn not simply how to make certain things happen in certain languages, but how to make things happen in general with whatever language you have in front of you. So everything that you encounter is going to require some form of learning. So the trick, as I keep saying, is you have to learn. Here we're going to learn how to learn to solve these new problems with whatever tools we're given. So people often look at programming and think it's this very complicated process. And I always come from the perspective that no, it's not complicated. It has a lot of things and a lot of sort of glamour around it that makes it seem complicated. Because at the end of the day, the computer, I've got these three statements here. The computer will always do exactly what you tell it to do. If it does something you don't want it to do, it means you told it the wrong thing. The computer does whatever you tell it in the order that you give it that operation. So it's always going to do exactly what you say, one thing after another. And it only has the information that you've successfully given it, meaning it's not going to be able to figure things out on the fly that you haven't given it. So if there's a piece missing from your code, the computer isn't going to be able to guess what that piece is. Well, maybe the IDE is going to be able to suggest it, but until it's in your code, the computer doesn't know it. So really what programming is structuring information about how you want the computer to behave in a way that the computer understands. And the way the computer understands it in this case is the code that we're putting into it. And in this class, that code is going to be HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So to get into a little bit of programming theory itself, let me first take a drink of tea. That spiced chai is mighty good. Anyways, so in the procedural model of programming, this is how pretty much all programming you ever do is going to work. Code is going to be executed procedurally, one piece after another, which means, you know, it goes beyond just like when you've got a function and the code inside that function is doing one thing after another. It goes by the thing of when you declare a variable. Here, I'll even pop out of this and just give an example in Notepad here. If I'm in JavaScript and I declare a variable and call it as a global variable, and I make a function here, I'll call it func A. Here, can you guys see that? Here, let me make sure you guys can see this. I'm not planning on doing anything that's going to be that hard to, that's going to take that much space up. Where is the... Does anyone on the voice chat remember how to do this, how to make the text bigger? I know it's like real straightforward, like once I find it, it's like, oh, that, oh, style configure, there it is. Font size, 16, how's that? Oh, that did not do it. Style. View. Zoom. Oh, here we go. It was just zoom. Okay, so here we are. We're zooming in. All right, so if I make a function, and of course a function is going to have, what is it called? An argument, right? And I make this function over here, and I have it right, and all I have to do is return whatever you pass it plus 1, and then I make another function and I call it main, and yeah, that's a thing in a lot of programming languages. Is you'll have a function called main. That's the first one it gets drawn, or that gets called, and I say func A, and I pass it 1. Right? All right, so what I've got here, so let's say that I've got this happening. So to give you something about procedural theory that might be a little advanced, so if you don't get it, then that's fine. But to give you something about procedural programming, so that you can understand it. All right, so this is a very basic program. All I'm doing here is I'm declaring this empty variable up here. I'm creating this function here that adds 1 to whatever it's given. And then I'm going to main, and I'm calling this function here. I'm setting this variable to 1, calling this function that adds 1 to it, and then printing the variable, right? So what here you should understand is that from the perspective of when the program actually runs, it might seem to people like, oh, it's starting by, you know, that's where it starts. It starts with making that 1, and then it goes to this, and it goes up here, and it doesn't do it in order because it goes up here, and then it comes down here, and then it prints it. That's not actually what's happening. what's really happening is that the program, when it's being loaded, so the program gets loaded into memory, and then it gets sort of what we call instantiated. When it's loaded in, the computer isn't trying to run it at first. It's just trying to figure out what the program it's running is. So the first thing it sees is that you've got a variable there that you've declared called global variable, and it says, oh, I got to remember that this variable exists. Okay, so it puts a memory address down and it says this memory address right here, that's that variable. Then it sees this, and it says, oh, I don't know what they're going to do with it, but that's a function. And I need to remember that this function does this set of things, right? And then it gets to here, and it says, oh, here's my main function. And I need to figure out what all this does and put it together, and okay, when this function gets called, then it gets called, and then I run it. And then it gets to the end of the file, and then your program actually starts to run, and then when you call main and you have main do its thing, it's actually referencing things that already exist. So that's a common misconception in programming that I just felt like, hey, that's worth mentioning right now and stopping for 5 seconds. So that's the way that all programs really work at the end of the day, is that they load themselves into memory and then they operate the way they operate. And sometimes we hear people talk about stuff called object-oriented programming, which we'll get some into because you have to understand it for JavaScript. But what object-oriented programming is, all it really is that you've created objects somewhere in the procedural stuff, and then you're calling them, and then all the code is still happening procedurally. There's also something called asynchronous programming, also known as multi-threaded programming, where you have multiple things happening at the same time. But even then, you have 2 sets of program code running at the same time. What's really going on there, though, is that you've taken one set of procedurally, of one after the other linear procedural functions, and all you've done is you've said that one part of the processor should run this and another part should run this, and then inside those threads themselves, you're still doing things procedurally. It's still all happening one thing after the other. So the only difference is that you have to be careful when you're doing things between them, because you don't know what part of one thread is on what part of another thread, or you don't know what part of the other thread is happening from the one thread, I should say. Anyway, don't worry about that. We're not getting into multi-threaded programming anytime soon. I'm just making a statement. So pretty much every language that you encounter is going to have some basic syntax, which is basically that you've got keywords that make certain things happen within a language. An example of a keyword would be like static. In the C and C++ type programming languages, a static variable is a variable that even if it's part of some larger data structure, it's always just in one spot in the memory. And so even if you've got a bunch of different copies of this data structure, that static variable is always going to be in the same spot in memory. So it's always going to be the same no matter how many copies you make. And that's a keyword, because you can apply that to all sorts of things. Languages have variables that you hold things in. Some variables can be typed or untyped in a language. So in C++, I have to specify that a variable is a Boolean or an integer or a character or a string, right? But in JavaScript, which we're working with today, you don't have to do that. It will figure out on the fly what kind of variable should go in this spot. It's also got statements. like if statements or whatever, statements and functions, which are pieces of code you can refer back to. If you think about it, a function is really a type of statement. All you're saying is I'm declaring that this can be a statement. You also have things like if statements. Every language has an if statement. You can't really make a functional language out if statements. They all have some sort of loop. And they have brackets within them. And, you know, you can just sort of like, you can just sort of make things happen inside of them. So yeah, that every language is going to be kind of like that. So yeah, I was talking about object-oriented programming. We're not going to get too deep into that today, at least, but I do want to touch on it because JavaScript has it, and it was this big sort of fad concept back in like the 90s and 2000s that, oh, everything has to be object-oriented. But really, object-oriented programming is just it's a slightly newer paradigm of looking at your code that is a little easier to understand from a top-down level. Objects are a type of data structure that can have variables, which some people will call attributes, and functions, which we call methods. And a class in object-oriented programming, you're going to have something called a class, which is a big data structure that you create that says what all these variables and functions of this class are going to be, that, you know, we also refer to as, like I said, attributes and methods. So, and it'll make sense in a second when I say, basically what you do with a class in itself isn't a variable that you can change around. What a class in itself is it's like a template for a variable. And when you make a variable off the class, we call it an instance. And you can use everything from that class to interact with that instance. So basically what an instance is a set of, here's a place where we're storing all those variables in, and if you want to run the methods of this class on this instance, you can do that. So to try and give an example of that, it basically looks like this. You create a class, and you have, say, equals 0. No, you don't see. Here, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do it like this, so we can be clear that attributes are really just the object-oriented way of talking about this. Return. Sure, why not? Right? Okay, so when I'm working with this class, what I'll have to do is there my instance equals so okay, so what I'm doing here in this sort of pseudocode that wouldn't actually run, remember what I just said. It's all really procedural. All I'm telling the computer is, hey, there's a class. It's called my class. It has these variables inside of it and this function, right? Then I come down here and I say, here's a variable. it's going to be called my instance, and what I want you to put into it right now is an instance of my class. So this is where we talk about objects. I'm creating an object here. When we say new, the new keyword is basically saying, hey, allocate some memory and put whatever's in that memory in the variable I just gave you. And that's a keyword right there. When I talk about keywords, that these things that aren't functions or anything, they just do stuff. But and then down here, I'm taking my instance and I'm calling the method from my class, because my instance is an instance of my class, and therefore the method inside of my class can be applied to my instance. It is also a method of my instance, because my instance also contains variable attribute A and variable attribute B. What it'll do is that's basically the same thing. It's just, you know, hey, give me whatever attribute A is. So that's what we talk about when you hear object-oriented programming. This is all they're talking about. People talk about this like it's a completely new paradigm. It really is the same thing as the procedural model I was talking about. I forgot to put text in this slide, but that's okay. We don't need the text because we can just kind of talk about this for a second. So the one more thing that you're going to need to learn about languages in general and programming is that programming languages have what's called standard libraries, or there's something called a library. And what a library is I don't think that's in JavaScript. That's C that I just wrote. But so what you can do is you can have a library, and what a library is it's someone else wrote out a ton of code for you, and that code does all sorts of things. So what you can do with a library is you can use code that's already been written by other people to not have to write it again. So for example, something that's in a lot of standard libraries is there is I think in JavaScript it's called math. So if we remember our math, the absolute value of something is that number without anything after the decimal. So if I throw, actually I can even throw, right? So the code that I'm trying to simulate here is, I can include the standard library, right? And what I'm actually doing is I'm including, when I include a standard library, there is something called the standard library. When I include that, I'm including a bunch of code that someone else wrote when they were building the compiler and all that, so that you could have this stuff on demand, these very basic functions. So let's say I want to include, you know, I'm going to include this. It'll never be written this way, but I'm going to do it like this. So I want to include this library that's called standardlibrary.math, right? And now in my code, I don't need to define any of this stuff right here, because that's going to be up in here. Or it could be I don't know. I don't want you to think that that has to be the same. These two things are actually the same. But, you know, in your standard library math operations or whatever, you're going to have this absolute value function, and you're going to have someone has written in a definition of pi, and you can run the absolute value function on that variable that's in there that's pi, and just straight up return 3, or it will return 3, and you don't have to write a code to get absolute value, and you don't have to write pi out because someone already wrote it for you. There's also third-party libraries you can grab. I don't think we'll get into those anytime soon in this course, like even in the next class or so. But I'm just going to say there is this thing you can do where you can go download someone else's library that they wrote and then use that to speed up your coding process because, like, for example, there's a popular one called SDL, which is the standard direct media layer. And it's a C class. It's a C library, and it has functions that do things like you can write things directly to the screen, or you can write things directly to the speakers, or you can directly get a memory address for the keyboard and then see what the keyboard is doing. And it's built in such a way that it works no matter what operating system you're on. And it allows people to really quickly write these relatively optimized programs that, you know, for games or other visual interfaces. And it just, you can port it to every single system because it works the same on every system. It's the same library. So, having chattered about that for a while, don't know where people are. Oh, here we go. Keybounce is talking in the chat. I'm going to just make sure because this is the end of this part of the slideshow. The next part is the actual thing. So I'm just going to talk in the chat. Y'all can be on voice if you want. I don't want to say that people should be on YouTube. You can be on voice. I do not mind if people want to talk on voice. So Keybounce is saying something. Yeah, this is an audience participation thing, guys. If you, what is going on here? Why can't I see what you're saying? I don't know. I turned it down so that you won't be loud on the stream anymore. I think the reason you were loud on the stream was because I noticed that I had in OBS, which is what I'm using to stream to YouTube, I had the audio for the actual computer turned up way higher than my voice. So that's fixed now. You're fine. It was on my end. Just come back on the voice chat. If you guys want to be on the voice chat, that's probably better. If you want to participate. I have made the text bigger. Oh! Nobody told me that I wasn't... Okay. Okay. Yeah, okay. Well, here it is. If you guys want to come back on the stream, on the voice chat, I'm streaming my screen now. I didn't even realize that I had forgot to hit that button. Okay, so Keybounce asked an interesting question here. Both func and func can define a function. Yes, but actually, no. So, when I put func and function there, what I'm doing is something called pseudocode, right? Which is where you just kind of write, in not any language in particular, just sort of a programmatical, like a programming-like sort of language that we use to talk about, like, hey, this is what it could potentially look like in some language. And so we just kind of write, you know, oh, here's like a class, and you know, here's a class, here's a function, this is what functions look like. We all know what these are. This is just a kind of language that programmers use to describe things to each other, and we use it a lot in teaching to just sort of lay things out, and it's quicker than trying to do it correctly. So, like, the ways that you can write a function, we call them declarations. In some languages, it's right. In some languages, it's and then in some languages, it's that's the C way of doing it. Is in C you can do something like void or int, and then you can do this fun thing, because C and C++ are popular because they don't put any layers between you and the system. So you can do this thing where you have here, I'll do this. This is some crazy crap that you can do in C. I'm not going to do something really weird. And then let's see, it's the right? Okay, this is some weird. This is what I was talking about with procedural stuff. Okay, this is what I was talking about with, yeah, just think about it procedurally. You know, this is actually being defined as somewhere in the memory it's got a function, that a piece of code that will do this. In C++, you can do something like this. Right? So in languages like C and C++ that have no barrier between you and the actual thing, I can I can do this thing where, why do I not have this set to like actually tag my this would be easier for you guys to see if I did this. Yeah. So I can do this thing in C++ where this is totally a tangent because it has nothing to do with JavaScript. In C++, though, you can do this thing where, oh, well, these are just places in the memory where you've got some code, right? So you can make a function that just, you pass the memory address of this function, right? And then you pass the memory address of this function to this other function, and then it sets that function to be the memory address of this other function. So what I'm doing is I'm creating this function here and this function here, but then this function is saying that what this function that I just passed is now this function. So this function is now identical. It's now the same function. It's just another way to call this function once I do this. Like, wrap your head around that for a second. That's really what's going on behind the scenes at the end of the day. By the way, guys, you don't even have to have a microphone on your computer. It'd actually just be easier for me to be checking Discord for y'all talking. Move in. Alright, so I'm going to answer your last question, then we'll move on. But one idea of object-oriented programming. Remember how to do. Okay, so yeah, this is the point of object-oriented programming that I was talking about, that paradigm. All the routines for, you know, when you've got a class here, these classes, you fill them up with a bunch of methods, right? And the methods do all sorts of things. And then everything for working with that class is in one place. The other day I was on Stack Overflow, and someone asked a question with JavaScript. So I'm going to give an example of exactly what you're talking about. In JavaScript, you can do this thing where you go find... You go find a tag somewhere in the document object model, and you put it in a variable, and you then can do one of two things. Right? So you can do this two ways. Okay, so here we go. All right. So these are two different ways to effectively do the same thing most of the time. And I've been very specific, most of the time. This is the way they tell you to do it. This is the way people do it and then wonder why something doesn't work. So basically, when you're messing around in an HTML document, and you're looking at, when you're in JavaScript, and you're messing around in an HTML document, and you're looking at all these little tags, and you're like flipping through them and whatnot, right? And that's called the document object model, that you're popping through it like it's one big class or whatever. What you can end up doing is some of these attributes do something more than just that. That is very hard to, what's the word? Some of these tags, they all have attributes on them, right? Some of these attributes are very hard to change like straight away. So I'm trying to think of how to explain this. Well, let's say that that you're changing the class of a tag, right? Right? So remember, if we remember from last class, the class of a tag does a bunch of things. It doesn't just, you know, it's not just a word in the HTML document. It does things. It gets referenced by the CSS. It gets referenced by the JavaScript. It's in the document object model. It's this big way to actually look through an HTML file and find parts of it. So let's say that you tried to set it this way on a browser that its implementation of JavaScript hadn't fully taken that into account. you could break something and have no idea why it's broken. When we do it through a method, though, this method is probably going to look something like, when we do it through the setAttribute method, though, that's a method of a class called, you know, document object model or something. I don't remember what they're called. But it's a method of some class somewhere that is made to represent that tag on the HTML page when we're messing with it in JavaScript. So it looks something like this, right? And it's going to be, you would think it would be something like, this is a way that you can, inside of a class, you can reference the instance of that class with the word this. But this dot attribute equals value. You might think at first that it's going to be doing this, right? But what it's really going to check first is or no. Right, it's really going to do some if statements to check for stuff like that. And it's going to do a bunch of them. And then if, you know, it's going to check for all of these edge cases, right? So class, ID, on click could be one. I don't know, whatever. It's going to check for a bunch of edge cases. It's going to check for a bunch of edge cases, and then at the end, it's going to do the simple thing. And it's probably written in a way more efficient way than this right here. It's probably just got some sort of data mapping that I'm not going to try and explain right now to make it really quick. But what this is doing is not the same as this, simply because this gives the person programming the JavaScript interface on the browser itself the power to say, oh, don't just do it like this. Handle it in some complicated way that doesn't have these potential bugs that you can create by doing that. Conversely, this might actually, what the browser might also do, just so that you can't do this, is it might call setAttribute, it might just replace every time you try to do this with this, because it knows that, hey, you shouldn't be able to do that right there. That's not the way that you should be doing that. It knows better. Anyway. Yeah. So yeah, to repeat what I just basically said, as a template, you know, when we think of a class as a template, each instance of that block of data is going to, it's going to be a different block that will have the exact same method of manipulating. And there's more stuff. There are ways to make multiple classes that have the same class as, like, what we call it is a parent class. So you've got classes that are more classes made from the template of that first class that, because they're made from that, they have all the same things as that class, but you can change things around. But then you can treat them as if they're that class that you made them from. That's called polymorphism. It's things that are interesting about classes, and they're all going on in the background right now, but we don't need to worry about them today, because today we're learning how to make a web page. And that's a lot simpler than all this other stuff that we're talking about. So, for those who were not here last time, these are some programs that I mentioned that y'all should look into. We need a text editor for this class. Notepad will work, but I recommend Notepad++ because it works better. If you're on Mac, go look into Xcode. Xcode is a Apple made. I don't know, it might not be the standard anymore, but back when I was into Macintosh programming, Xcode was a standard IDE that they programmed in. IDE stands for Interactive Development Environment. It's what we do a lot of programming in. You don't need a fancy IDE for web development because all you're doing is making text that is read by a browser, but this program exists, it's free. And then obviously, the way that HTML and CSS and JavaScript work is they're supposed to be standardized through the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, which we call the W3C. And what they do is they set a standard for how all these are supposed to work, and then every browser is supposed to comply with that standard. That's not always the case, but in general, Firefox, Chrome, and Edge and Safari are pretty good about it. I think Firefox is usually the best about trying to comply with those standards. But otherwise, and we talked about this in the last class, otherwise it really doesn't matter which one you use. Really, at the end of the day, you just need a text editor that can save things as .txt and a web browser. So, I am going to take another chip on my teeth, and then I will recap. I'll give anyone who needs to download those time for a second. Okay, I'm assuming that y'all are down. If anyone needs to be downloading these, they are already. So, anyone say anything interesting in the chat rooms? No, there's nobody on the voice chat. Oh, Keybounce said, yeah. Another reason why you don't want to bypass some of this class stuff that I mentioned over here is you don't know what all this function might be able to do. It might be making sure that the data, that you're not making weird copies of data in the memory that are getting lost somewhere. There's all sorts of stuff that it could be checking for. Anyway, so let's speed up a little for a second. Talk about what we were talking about last time. So last time we learned that HTML, an HTML document is made up of tags. And those tags are in these little triangular brackets. And you make a tag by opening the brackets and doing stuff with it. And inside these tags, and different tag names are made to have different behaviors, but inside these tags you have attributes, and those attributes can be all sorts of things about the tag, and an attribute has a value. And we're going to work with a few of those today. And then inside of the tags, you know, you're going to have an open tag and a closed tag, and in between them you're going to have these contents. And what that's going to do is that can be text or whatever, or it can be more tags. And sometimes we refer to that as nested tags. We don't in HTML usually because, you know, all the tags are nested. They're all inside of some other tag, but content and tags are both considered elements in the way that we think about this. That they're all sort of elements of how the page is built. So we also talked about CSS. CSS can be delivered in 3 ways. You can make a .css file and link it from the HTML. You can put a style tag, a pair of style tags in the HTML document, and then you open it and close it. And then you just write CSS inside of that, like you would in a thing. Or you can have a style tag or a style attribute in the HTML can have a style attribute. And then the value is just a bunch of properties and values. So when we're writing CSS code, though, in general, you have something called a selector. And that's, you know, it can have tags, it can have classes with a dot before them. It can have the pound sign and then IDs, or an ID. And then the selector is basically just a statement that tells the browser, hey, these are the conditions under which this should be applied to an element. And then inside of, you know, this whole thing is called a rule. Inside of a rule, we're going to have a property. We're going to have a bunch of properties, and each of those properties can have a value. And that's also known as a declaration. So that's CSS in a nutshell. And then you've got JavaScript. JavaScript can be in another document, .jvs or .jv. And you can run that JavaScript, or you can either link it from the HTML document, or you can have a script tag inside of the HTML document. And inside of this script tag, you have, you know, JavaScript written inside of the script tag. So JavaScript has variables, and those variables have values. And it has functions, which can be passed arguments, and they can have code inside of them, and they can return other variables, basically. You can call functions from HTML to make things happen with attributes like the onClick or something called an action listener that you can apply from JavaScript. And you can use the JavaScript to, in turn, mess around with the HTML elements through something called the document object model. So let's go do that. We're going to start a new project. We're going to open up our Notepad++ or whatever editor we're using. And we're going to start a new project. And let's see, let's go ahead and make a CSS file. So, and when you start a new file in a project, you want to label it. So you don't have to put the name of it at the top. That's just something people do. Right? So we've got a CSS file. I'm going to save it. I'm going to create a new... I've got this here. So let's see. I'm going to add this to... I'm going to add this to the sidebar. Okay, what else? I'll do this. There, I've got a new little thing here. Here's style.css. If you notice, Notepad++ automatically, when it saw me type in .css, it automatically changed the, give it the correct formatting. So if I do something like that, okay, Notepad++ knows exactly what's going on. It sees what I'm doing. So let's make another one. Let's see, what else did I say down here? You don't need that right now. So I said let's make a JavaScript file. And we're going to assign our names in it. So we're going to say I'm going to go back to this. This is what I meant to do. Okay, so I've done that. So here we're in a JavaScript document. So we've got script. There, I'll just say something different. Okay, so we've got this. We will get into this in a second. All right, so we're gonna go and we're gonna name this script.jds, and once again, did I forget something? I think I forgot how to do this. Hang on a second. I bet I'm using the wrong file name. Oh, right. Okay. I was wrong. You don't name it JVS, you just name it JS. I don't know why I thought you named it JVS. That's what my brain does sometimes. There it goes. See, I knew it was wrong the moment it said, I knew something was wrong the moment it didn't color things properly. All right. So now we've got that. And how do we do it in this one? Because I've got like 10 different languages going in my head now. Yeah. Just to show me an example. Here we go. It's this. You just do this. You just type function. Okay. All right. So we've got a style. We've got a function. We've got a style. We've got a script. And let's make an HTML page. But let's do it the fancy way, because we're a little bit more advanced than just trying to jam things together. Okay, so what we're going to do here . Yeah, why not just do that? Let's do this. Okay, so this is a weird little exception to the normal rules. This is called metadata that you're putting in here. It's just, there's pieces of data you can put into a document that help, like, whatever web server is trying to look at it, try to determine what to do with it. So you put in doc type HTML right there with like the this little thing usually means, oh hey browser, you don't need to look at this. Like you don't display this. This isn't something you display when you've got the exclamation point. we just type doc type in all caps and then HTML. And that just, if something's trying to quickly figure out, well, what am I looking at? Is this an HTML document? Oh, yeah, it is. As if the title of the file wasn't enough. Anyway, so we have our HTML document, right? And our HTML document is going to have a head and a body. And it's going to be inside these HTML tags. And that's all it really needs to be. So let's go ahead and save that as thing.html. What is it? What do I want to do? Index. I'm going to call it index.html. That is a common name for a page. That is the default name of a page that you want to put on a website. The default is going to be index.html. That's the default homepage, which goes back into the days of, early HTML websites and before that, where the index is where you're going to find, the homepage of a server is going to be the index. It's where you go to find everything else that's on there. This is the top level where, everything else is accessed by. Even today, browsers still go after that index as their first thing they go for. So now we have this. We have this is what our thing looks like. What? Oh, that's because I have this that I can delete. This is what our directory that we have these 3 files in should look like. But if we remember, you have to link them together. So, link CSS from HTML. Let's remind ourselves of how to do that. So we're going to go to, here we go. We're going to go to Indian, the Mozilla developer docs, developer.mozilla.org. And we're going to look up, hey, how am I supposed to do this again? All right. And it says right here that it looks like this. So we're going to do link. All right. So we do link, and then we do href. That stands for, it's HTTP reference. And we're going to go slash. All right. And that should link the style sheet that we've got over there. And then we're also going to ask Indian link JavaScript from HTML. And I don't remember these off the top of my head, just to be clear, like nobody does unless they do this all the time. Unless they specifically make new documents by hand all the time. I'm not going to copy my old documents. I'm just going to like show you, hey, this is what you're doing. All right, let's see. So it's the script element, actually. Right? So we've got a script element. There we go. So with the script element, we can use it one of 2 ways, really. Here we have script, and then we do src, which stands for source. We say script.js. Then we close the tag, and then we put a closing tag over here, that slash whatever to close it. The other way you can use script tags is, I think I mentioned this. You do something like this. And you see like Notepad++ is already picking up that, yeah, this is, whoops. Notepad++ is already kind of picking up that this stuff in here, this is JavaScript. Same with up here. You could do something like that with the style tag. I think you actually have to tell it that it's CSS in there, but you could do something like that. But, you know, we're not going to do that either. We're just going to link to a different file. Best practice is to link to a different file if you can, unless it's very specific to this document. The best practice is always to link to a different file, because this means that if I make a bunch of other pages on this site, I can link back to this style.css, and then it's the same. So, we're going to move forward with modern web design from the HTML and CSS perspective. Let me do this. Let me make my slideshow all pretty. There we go. Get rid of this thing. Alright. So, first thing let's do. Do we remember these from last time? Alright, we're going to lay out some divs inside of our Oh, you know what I meant to talk about that I didn't talk about? I will flip back. I'm going to try not to do this too much. I wanted to talk about this for a second. So the header. I wanted to talk for a second about the header. So in the header of a page, you can put all sorts of interesting little pieces of metadata. So to give an example, Alright, so I'm going to MDN. I'm looking up the head. Alright, so doing all sorts of interesting little bits of metadata. So the idea of the head tag is it's going to have all this stuff that you can do in other, that isn't going to be in the page itself. It's just data surrounding the page itself. So here's one example of a tag that you should definitely know. And you should definitely learn this one. Title. Here we go. I gave my page a nice title. And let's see. Say I want to, let's see, what else might I do? Give myself a title. I could also do something like meta tags, which, let's see, there's a few. There's one that does keywords. I'm trying to remember what it was. HTML. Yeah, W3 schools. I'll let you try to tell me right now. Okay, so here we've got W3 schools doing it. This is a bit of an old style of this, but you can still do this. This still should work with a lot of applications. What am I doing? Oh, that's right. It's just this. There we go. All right, description. So if you look at this, you'll see that I'm just... So what I can do here is I can put all sorts of information about my web page in these meta tags. Like the description, you know, says something that in theory, and it still works in some applications and not others, but in theory, your description tag, in theory, another program that's reading your HTML file just to see what it is should ignore everything in the body and only look at the head. And it's going to look for these meta tags. And, or at least that's the point of these. So your description might be what shows up in, you know, hey, this search result came up. What is it? Oh, it's whatever's in the description here. Your keywords are going to be, oh, what do I file this under in my database of pages? Oh, I guess I file it under these, you know, these keywords. You know, oh, who wrote this? If we want to like quickly reference like the in our bibliography or something, who wrote this? Oh, it's this person. I recently learned something interesting. I used to think that Mastodon, the big social network, didn't have a way to do this, to verify yourself. There's a way to verify yourself in Mastodon. It's through site meta tags. Right? Okay, so all right, so all right, that's the correct format. It stays the same. Okay, so if you put in a meta tag and you put the relationship as me, right? If you just type me right there, and then you make the actual, like the HTML or the HTTP reference URL, the URL of your Mastodon, of one of your Mastodon profiles, or of your main Mastodon profile that you want to be verified through, what it will do is it will say that it'll confirm that you're the same person when you link that from your Mastodon profile. And it'll look like it'll basically look like mine. And these are other Mastodons. It does this with other Mastodons too, if it thinks you're the same person. But so if you link two Mastodon profiles from each other, it does this. But also, if you link a website in these, you know, meta tags up here, and the website has that rel me, Mastodon will see that and then link back to, and then, you know, put that check mark and say, hey, this person is confirmed as the person who runs that web page because they put that meta tag on the web page that says it's them. I thought that was very clever. Anyway, moving on. I did not mean to spend that much time on that. Alright, so nobody said anything interesting in that time. Alright. So we're now going to make some divs. Let's make some divs. Alright. So if you remember from last time, we're going to go into our body, because that's where everything really happens. Right? Alright, so just going to make some divs. Right? I'll do it like this. I'll just do 2 of them for now. We'll start with 2 of them. Right? And I'm going to give this an ID. Give it the idea of title bar. I'm going to format it like this. I'm going to H1 there. I am putting it inside the H1 tags because remember the H1 tags do interesting things with meta. They don't just do formatting, they create their own other stuff that happens in the background. They create anchors. So this is the content. And I'm going to say okay. And maybe I'll even do this. I'll do something kind of interesting. Alright. So I am making, I'm thinking about it, this should be, this should be called not title bar, page head. And then I'm also going to make another div down here, and the ID is going to be page foot. This will all make so much sense in a second. So I'm making some divs, right? Okay, so I've made some divs, right? Let's go over to style.css, give myself divs. I'm going to just, I've got this here. I'm going to apply this to all divs. If we remember from last time, this will make a 4-pixel wide border around every div. That's what it'll do. It'll be gray, because that's what 888 does. Alright, so the page title is content. Okay. So now if I go and I open this up, ta-da! Zoom in on this. Okay, remember this from last time, that you have some content in a page div and it does a thing. Or you have some content and it does a thing. Alright, let's see. Oh, duh, just inspect. Okay, so remember when we want to open our debugger, we go into, in Chrome at least, we go into more tools and we go into developer tools, right? And now we can see what all this stuff is. So this is the main page title. This is some content, and this is stuff. Okay. So this is a boring little page, but this is the beginnings of where we can put some stuff. So keep growing, bro. I gotta keep growing. Okay, I'll keep growing, Reese's, or whoever that is. All right, so we're going to keep growing this page, like you said. All right, so if I remember correctly, all right, so I'm just going to pull this over into this part of this over into the CSS file so that it's easy to reference for a second. All right, so if you remember correctly, we want to talk about the page head. We want to talk about something that has an ID. We do a pound sign or a hashtag or whatever you want to call it, and then we just leave it at that. So we're going to take these two things that have this. It's good practice is to split them up a little bit. All right, so there's the page head, there's the main div. All right, now let's see. Here's a class. So what's the class? It's the content div. It's a content div. Remember, IDs, the way that IDs work, you only have one thing per ID. You don't repeat the ID. The class is something that you can repeat, though. Or the class is something that's made to be repeated. Divs or IDs are not. So by saying that this is an ID, I'm basically telling everything, hey, this is only going to show up one time on the page. By saying it's a class, I'm saying, hey, I'm going to reuse this over and over again. All right, so here we have my page head. And I want to make all this stuff have a more interesting layout. And this is where we're going to start talking about positioning. That's where I wanted to... No, this is where I wanted to keep, talk about doing that now. Okay, so we're going to talk about position now. Talked about it a little bit last time. Let's really get into it. So, position static, position relative absolute. Okay, so remember we have these various ways that we can determine the position of an object. So if you want the position of this object to be like it normally would, exactly in the part of the page where it's supposed to be, you use static. If you want to offset it from that position, you use position relative. If I want to specify exactly on the page where I want that object to be and it never deviates, I give it an absolute position. So I'm going to copy the code straight off of NPM because that's how you program. Remember, you just copy code from other people. It's not about knowing the specific code. It's about knowing how you're supposed to use the code that you see. So here we've got, I don't like the way they formatted it. I'm going to change that a little bit. But here we are. Okay. I want the top to be 0 and the left to be 0. And I want the position to be absolute. And I want there to be I want to do this. I want to make some crazy stuff. Or some interesting looking stuff. Right? Okay. So I'm going to make this look like this. I'm going to say that the position is absolute. The top is 0. The left is 0. And it's going to be like this. So then when I go and I save my document, so when I go and refresh my page, it doesn't look quite right, but it sees where I'm going with this. All right, so let's fix this a little bit. Height. Let's set the height to... What is the height of this right now? Curious. Let me check in the debugger. What is the height of this right now? So if you go into your debugger, there is a way. You'll look at the computed layout, right? And you can see the page head, right? Okay, so I select the element that is the div with the ID of page head. Then I go into computed layout. It's where your style sheet would be. And it says that it's almost 80 pixels high, right? I think I've given it a bit much there. I'm going to make it, how about 64 pixels? And then the width needs to be 100% of the allocated space. So the width is 100%. Right? So now, and let's give it a background so that we don't get other stuff in front of it. Let's make the background white because we're not doing anything styly right now. Okay, that's looking a little better. That's it's 64 pixels tall. If you're not zoomed all the way in like I am, but it's 64 pixels tall. It stands out on its own. It's clearly at the top of the page. Except, you know, obviously there's a problem because it's now overlapping that other content. But that other content maybe should learn to get out of the way. So let's teach it how to get out of the way. All right, so what is the other content inside of it? We've got this main div down here, right? So if I give the main div this position of being absolute, but now I say the top of it should be 64 pixels. The top attribute, what is it called? It's not attribute, but what is the name of these? Properties. Properties and values. So if I give the top one the property of 64 pixels, right? And I say the background color of this is also white because I don't want it to have a problem. All right? So if I do that, oops. Hey, look, it got knocked down out of there. All right, but I don't like that it's kind of overlapping that. So let's fix that. Let's give it some padding. So we're going to do padding, and I think 8 pixels should be enough, right? Yeah, that sounds about right. Wait, was it padding? No, it's margin. Okay, so padding is internal, margin is external. I forgot that for a second. So we're going to give it some margins. And let's actually specify this for a second, because I want to do something interesting in a second. 8px margin. Now let's go with 12. Let's give it more clearance. And we've given it a padding of 4 pixels. Okay, so now our content, all this content we're going to stick down here, it's now in a nice little standalone space, right? But now we've got that footer thing that's been hidden. Oh, it's been hidden all the way up there because with all these things absolutely positioned, it became the only thing, you know, in a normal positioning on the page. Right now we're breaking outside of that default positioning. So we're going to take the page foot. We're going to give it some position. All right, so what did we do with this other one? We gave it some very specific stuff. We give it a top, but this time we're going to give it a value for the bottom and the left, right? And remember, we need width to be 100%, so it goes across the entire thing. All right, so let's make sure that we can see it by giving it that special border stuff. Okay, so now we've got it doing this. And there we are. So now I've got this page that I've just made that has this, very, kind of nice layout where this is down at the bottom, this is up at the top, and then I've got this thing in the middle. I've got like a beginning and middle and end. And I believe, let me check to see this. I think, I'm going to use that BR/. I'm just going to quick test this. Oh, that's weird. It is treating the tag. Oh, you know what? Can I? That's interesting. You know what? Copy that element. And I'm just going to do this. Paste, 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 paste. Okay, so what I've just verified, because I wasn't sure, I wasn't remembering properly if this was the case or not. Actually, here's how I should really test this. All right, so sometimes you don't remember if something works a certain way in programming, so you go back and you just do a quick test like this. Oops. Okay, so now I've just established that, okay, this right here is going to be a potential issue. That when we scroll down, it's like, oh, this is all, putting it down at 0 is not putting it at 0 for the page, it's putting it 0 for the thing itself, or for the screen when you first load the page. Let's see if someone said something in the... Okay. Someone that uses large fonts will hate you for fixing pixel size counts. Okay, so Keybounce is bringing up a good point. It is actually bad practice to use pixel size counts, like, at all, because remember, different people will have different sizes on the screen, and some people might be setting up special whatever, they might be, what's going on? There it is. Some people might have something set up so that they don't have to, so that it's easier to read, they make the font sizes bigger. And pixel count, changing the pixel count doesn't necessarily, if you use pixels as your unit when you're doing positioning on a page, you could mess that up. So here's another content div. I'm distracted now. I'm looking back like hey, weren't there more people that said they would show up? I'm being distracted by my viewer count, or my perceived viewer count. For all I know, there's like 20 people watching, and they're just not saying anything. I don't know why no one's in the voice chat, by the way. Y'all should feel free to join the voice chat on the server. Like you come in and bug me. This is easier than saying that stuff. It would be easier than typing it in text if you just came on the voice and talked to me. Especially you, Keybounce. Okay, that's weird that these people are not. These people that said they wanted to show up did not show up. Okay, I just thought it was weird. I just think it's weird. Anyways, so, alright. So, how to put a div below all other content. Okay. So I'm not seeing someone talk about how to do this. So in programming, when you don't see someone else talking about how to do it, you can sometimes figure out clever ways to work around this. I'm going to show you the way that I worked around it back when I used to do this. When I used to do web design, the way that I would typically do this is I put the page foot inside of this content div, right? So now it's inside there, right? So now no matter how big this stupid content div gets, the page foot is going to be at the end of it. Right? And then instead of an absolute value, instead of it being absolute, I'll make it static. And that will put it in line with these other two elements. So, yeah. Let's see, how else do I want to do this? All right, so we've got that set up. Now, let's see. How do I make this actually do this? Let's see. Oh, I remember how I did this. All right, so I've got that, right? And doing that puts it just at the bottom of the thing. So here's how I fix that. So I say that the main div has padding on the bottom. Right? Man, this feels like a weird fetish thing. Padding on the bottom. I can say that on YouTube, right? Okay, so by putting padding on the bottom of the div, what I've done is I've made it so that these are gonna like give the div height, and this is going to put this below the div. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to give this a little bit more. No, okay. So the other thing I want to do is I'm also seeing that it's not spreading the entire page. So what I'm going to do is give that. Give it that 100% width. I am going to get rid of the margin on the sides and the padding on the sides. Actually, I'm going to get rid of all the margin and padding, except for the ones that I'm specifically specifying. You don't necessarily always have to do this. Most browsers default to 0. I have run into it in the past where I've had a bunch of problems because I didn't do that. So that's why I'm doing it. All right, let's see. And then we've got to change the border. We're doing no borders. We're doing open borders here. There's just going to be people coming across doing open borders. Alright, so why does the main div have... Why is it over by 8? Oh. Okay, so we are making this the size of the entire thing, right? So now we've got this thing that puts this below this content, and this is automatically sized. This main div is automatically sized to the content. Y'all might be noticing where this is kind of going. Y'all might have seen WordPress pages before. Y'all might have seen this kind of layout before. This is a very common layout that I'm doing right here. So now let's talk about this content div class that we were doing stuff with before and what we could do with it. So we're going to keep the position of these elements as static, right? Which, you know, they already were, but we're just going to specify it so that we know. And let's say we're going to make the width of these. We don't want them to be the whole page like that. They don't need to be. I'm going to say that they should only be 80% of the page width, right? And if we refresh, they are now only 80% of the page width. Actually, you know what? That's still too much. We don't need it. They're not that much. They look nicer if we have a bunch of random white space over here. You shouldn't actually do that. You should try to minimize white space, but there's a reason why we do this. All right, so we've got this set to a width of 60, right? But now, you know, it'd be nice for these content divs to be, you know, maybe a little wider, or to maybe be centered on the page. A few ways you could do this. Putting margin auto is one way. So do margin auto, and it centers the content. There are little tricks like that in CSS that, you know, it's very, you know, hit or miss whether or not they thought to put that in the standard. But margin auto, setting the margin to just auto, often fixes things. It often, like, centers content. We could also do margin. We know what the width of it is, so we know how to center in the page. And because these are relative values, I can just do margin 20%. And once again, oh, oops. Okay, so I can do this. I don't have to do both of them at once, but I did it anyway. Okay, so now we've got it nice and centered, right? All right, so we're getting into here how to do like a very reactive web page. That is, I forget what the specific name we do, but it's dynamically sizing things on the web page now. And as we can see, this is starting to look like a very common design of web page, isn't it? Where we've got this content in this center column, and we've got these columns on the side. So let's move forward a little and do something else with. Oh, what's this? You won't have the echo problem. I'm looking at what you're saying, and I key bounce. I'm looking at what you're saying over here, and I'm gonna point something out, which is if you mute the YouTube and you go talk in Discord with the YouTube muted, then we're all on the same page. Oh, okay. You're saying that you have a harder time responding to DMs. I don't know. It didn't click to me what you were saying here until just now. I don't know. I would. Okay, whatever. I won't keep going into it. I won't keep getting distracted by that. Alright, so metadata elements. We don't need any of that. We don't need any of that. We don't need that. We don't need any of that. Okay, so we've got this page now that's very responsive, and I hope y'all have been following along. So we've got a content pane, we've got a top bar and a center column, and here it says sidebars. So let's talk about how to build sidebars onto this. I think if you guys may have already guessed, the way you're going to build sidebars is similar to it's going to be similar to the other stuff, you know. I'm not bothering to do really fancy positioning or styling right now. I'm just gonna kind of bang out, you know, I'm just banging out a simple thing. Okay, so if I do it as is right now, it's kind of gonna freak out on me. You know, it's gonna be like, hey, what's this? This is in the old document object model thing, not the new one. What are you doing? So now I have to make a left sidebar and right sidebar over here in the style. All right, so remember, let's do this. If you remember, you do that for an ID. So we're doing, right? So we've defined these based on IDs. We've used that to select them in the selector. All right. So here, I will to assuage, you know, people, I will go figure out what the font of this is. Except the font that is listed for here is actually in pixels. I don't know what I don't actually know what the font size of this is. Well, you know what? This is why you can play around with it, honestly. I mean, so I'll do it the right way because Keybounce is saying to do it the right way. This is the correct accessible way. How about 16 EM? Oh, that's way too big. Okay, so all right, so here we go. We're gonna do point. All right, so how's 48 point sound? 48 point for the height. All right, so the height of that is 48 point. All right, so we're gonna make 48 point as the height of the page head. That means the main div's top needs to be at 48 point. And the sidebars also need to have that same top at 48 points so that they don't crash into that top bar. So we're going to make everything like this. We're going to do that. Oops. All right. Left. All right, so we're going to make this left side 0. And to make the right sidebar on the right, all we have to do is instead of left, we're specifying right. So what the left and right do, you know, all they're really doing is saying, hey, the amount of space you should have on the left, you know, or so basically the left side of this needs to be at this position, and the right side of this needs to be at this position. And because it's 0, I don't have to specify, you know, the actual size of that position. Or I don't have to specify like units. I can just say it's on the left. So here we've got the left and the right. All right, so let's see. We have the left sidebar and the right sidebar. And then they need a width. So they need a width, and that width needs to correspond with the fact that the content div is only 60%, and it's got these 20% margins on it. So we're going to make them both 20% wide. And now you're going to see, I made it explode. I don't know what I did. All right, let's see. Did I save? Yes. All right, so now it's just kind of exploding. So why is it not doing that? Let's see if we can figure this one out. Because remember, that's how this kind of works. You got to figure out why it's behaving in a way that you weren't expecting. All right, so you get the left sidebar and the right sidebar. And this is the left sidebar. That's an ID, and we go over to here, CSS, and it's the same. So that shouldn't have been a problem. If you notice, they're kind of jumping into place and then back for a second there, which is making me wonder what exactly might be going on. Because they shouldn't be jumping into place and going back, like as if it knows that. There it goes. Okay, I don't know what was doing that. I think the debugger was causing that. Okay. Now I got to figure out why they're in back. Oh, that's right. All right, so because of these, we're going to have to make a minimum height for this. I am going to go in and make a minimum height for me. So if you notice that they're kind of hidden behind things and there's something off about them, two things are happening here. So if you remember when I talked about procedural theory, like way at the beginning of this, I was saying that the computer is reading things in the order that you give it to them. These are being read in the order that they're given, and they're being displayed on the screen in the order that they're being given. So if I were to move this below, see if I can do it. Can I move this? Yeah, I can move those above. Okay, so if I move it above, then now they're displaying on top of it. I mean, there's still a bunch of problems, but now they're displaying on top of it. So the way that I need to get this content to get to the bottom of the screen and not interfere with it is by messing with these. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have, or it's going to be by messing with this. No, this. It's this. This is what I'm going to mess with. I need to give this a height. But I don't want it to always have that height, do I? Because if I just did height, you know, let's say I did height, if I did height like, I don't know, 80%, you know, let's say I do height 80%, you know, whoa, what did I do? Yeah, okay, see, I did height 80%, and it made this big, it shoved it down at the bottom of the page. Whoops. But let's see what happens if I go ahead and, you know, copy paste the content div a bunch of times. Oh, I made it height 80%, so now it's just going past. So now we need to talk about one of the things that you can do with these, which is I can make the height, I don't have to necessarily specify that the height is always 80%. I can just say min height is 80%. So now the minimum height is going to be 80% on this. So it will never go below 80%. But the maximum height is infinite. It's however much it needs. So this is how a lot of these displays on like Twitter or whatever are working, is basically by, you know, this methodology that I'm showing you of laying this page out. Okay, so here's the min height. Let's go with 60%. That'll probably be enough for these purposes. You should actually mess around with it yourself and do better than what I'm doing, because what I'm doing is just the really like ratchet way to do it. This is not the way you should be doing it at all. Like don't sit here thinking that oh yeah, I should make the height of the minimum height 60%. Like you need to figure out actual numbers to put here. I'm just throwing down numbers that are going to work. Like this all works. This is the way to lay out a page, I'm saying, but these aren't the actual dimensions that you should use. So I noticed that there was a bit of weird overlap. So let's do this. I noticed a bit of weird overlap on this stuff, so let's cut that down a little bit. All right, so now remember I was talking about procedural stuff. So the reason why the left sidebar and the right sidebar are showing where they are, you don't have to do what I just did. I'm moving these down here because I'm going to move them down over there. The reason why they're being displayed behind the rest of the content is because they're after the main div, or they're before the main div. So if we put them after the main div, right? That's what I was showing before. Now they're displayed in such a way that they're not floating in weird spots. All right, so how do we do now? All right, so we've got these margins, right? We've got this stuff that is laid out in this way. Yeah, I've basically showed you the layout of a page. So now we've got this page that looks all pretty and stuff. It's laid out in such a way that it works. And I can even add, I can even add a little more here. I can add, you know, we've got sidebars. I can add a top bar. I'm going to add a top bar real quick just so that we can mess around with that at some point. So I'm going to add a top bar. This will make sense as a piece of content. You'll see, I have a plan for this. Position absolutes. Let's see. Top. Point. All right, let's see. That's 0. Okay, so we've got a top bar, and it's going to be that. And if you watch me do the thing, I'm going to do the thing, and then it'll make sense that I'm doing a thing. Right. I'm going to do a paragraph tag. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do the center tag. That's what I'm going to use, is the center tag for this. And y'all will see what the center tag does. Okay, oh, and I need to move this down a little bit. So I need to go back to the style sheet. I need to say main div. You go down to 64. I want you to go down to 64 point. But everybody goes down to 64 point now. So there we are at 64 point. All right. So we got these fancy top bars. So now here we are with these things that have a layout, but they're all like black and white and just placeholder colors. So let's talk about coloration. So we can make these all look a lot better by messing around with the backgrounds and messing around with the layouts of them. All right, so let's do this. I'm going to come up here, and we're going to start up here, and we're going to go, and we're going to add. See, I already messed around with the background color, because it's really hard to not mess around with some of this stuff. All right, so we've got a background color for the page head. So now we need to think about how we're going to do our setup. So let's take a moment to talk about the design of various web pages. Let's talk about the design of various web pages. And we can talk about, yeah, it's an old site, I know. how different, you know, professional looking web designs look. See, this is a website I think I showed last time that is basically a bunch of designs that someone could use for a relatively professional looking blog or something. Like, these are all WordPress designs. So they've got a sidebar over here, and it's got a color, and they've got this thing up here. It's got stuff going on. They got, oh, what's this? It's completely, oh, you got a little content thing going on here. And what's this? It's, you know, I got some color here. All right, so let's look at some of the stuff about the way that some of these have, and the common sort of themes that we're seeing on these. One of them is that obviously the top bar and the sidebars have very different, like all these things have very different, they have different colorations that make them stand out from each other, and that's important. Even if it's just, you know, that this looks kind of shiny over here and this up here has a dark background, and, you know, otherwise this is just really annoyingly blue. You know, this is bad. This is way too blue. But that said, you know, even if that's the case, we still see what they've done here. Where they've made that this little pop out in the side, it's highlighted so that you can see it. And this up here, it's got like a sort of like shading to it. So when we're making when we're talking about how we want to give this a look, we need to think about, we need to get a unified look, and then we need to put together, you know, stuff around it. So here I've got them arguing. We got Celestia and Luna arguing about light themes and dark themes. And that's going to be our first consideration when we're talking about this. Because at the moment, we're just going to choose a light or dark theme. So here's what this is in right now is a light theme. So maybe I don't want that. Maybe I really want a darker theme. So let's just apply that to the page title at the very least. Let's do this. Let's make the background color of it white, of it black. And the text color of it can be white. That's a little silly. And let's get rid of this for now because, you know, the point of it was to let us see where it was. So now we've got this darker top. I'm going to go for a very dark theme for this site because I'm tired of looking at this light thing. It is not nice on the eyes. You know, that's light themes used to be very common. The shift over the past couple decades has been, you know, pretty sharply towards dark themes, specifically because as people look at these things more, they hurt their eyes on them more. So we're going to do dark themes. Or I'm going to do dark themes as my examples. So I'm going to come down here. Now, I think I want for everything on the page really to have this black thing going on. But I'm going to make this kind of minor exception that there's going to be a lighter color in the background to distinguish it. So that you can see where the content panes are because they are black, because they're different from everything else. Being black makes them different from everything. I'm just gonna go with that. I'm just gonna go with that phrasing. I'm not gonna worry about it. Being black makes them different from everyone else. So I'm just gonna roll with that phrasing. All right, so all right, I'm gonna roll with that phrasing. I'm gonna go do the top bar the same way, except I'm gonna give it a border on the top so that it has this nice so that when we see this, Okay, so that's what that looks like. Let's talk about hex characters. I don't like that that's such a bright border, so what I'm going to do is put 888. So this is hexadecimal, and all it is these three values are red, green, and blue RGB color values, right? So me putting in 888, first off, me putting only 8 colors puts it into 12-bit color mode instead of 24-bit, and it's about the equivalent of doing 888, 888888. But this is quicker and easier, and most of the time this is actually just fine. So my specific color I'm going to go with is that sort of gray, and I'm going to make the text that gray color too. I think that looks just fine. Actually, you know what? It will stand out better. So I'm going to make, instead of 888, 888. There we go. That looks a little better. All right, so now I'm just going to go down through all this stuff, and I'm going to go with that as the sort of color scheme for now. I'm going to skip the main div for now. We'll talk about the main div in a second. Oh, the content divs. I'm going to give them the content divs borders around the entire thing. There we go. That'll look nice, won't it? And then I'm going to give them this solid white color. Right? So on the left sidebar, I'm going to do just about the same thing. Except, yeah, I'm going to go with that. On the sidebars, I'm going to do the same thing. All right, that looks nice. Or that should look nice. We're doing 888. Right. All right, so now we're also doing, but except now we're also adding. All right. Let's see how this goes in. We go into the thing, and this is how that looks. All right. Mostly happy with that so far. All right, so we've got the left sidebar and the right sidebar. It looks like we should probably give some clearance on the left and right sidebar. The quick and easy way to do that. Even though, what's this key bounce is going to be like, oh, you can't do that, you can't do that. What we're going to do is left sidebar, I'm going to say should be over 4px. That's fine. That'll work. 4px. And the right sidebar can also be 4px. All right. So now we've got them no longer directly attached, and now we've got this nice little effect here that they're kind of floating off the side. And if it weren't for the fact that the content is a little bit too wide, let's set it even smaller. These centered content divs. Centered content div. All right, that looks fine so far. All right, and let's see else. What else? We want the top of these to be. We want these to be spread out a little bit more because it is a little weird that they're not spread out. You can tell that they're meant to be spread out. They want to be spread out. They want to be separate. Hey, this is that whole floating design concept that some people really like. Some people think this is like the best design ever is to have these things just kind of floating around stupidly. So why is this so far up? Okay. All right, so remember I was talking about messing around with things so that they look correct. I'm going to mess around with that, and it looks correct now. That there might be something wrong there, but it looks correct now. All right, so one of the things about this was that Let me check something real quick. So check something. Height. What happens if I add 100%? No, that's not what I want at all. Okay, never mind. Never mind. Alright, so this is starting to look like more like an actual web page, isn't it? Like, I think everyone can see what I'm doing here. Alright, so now if I change this background color to something else, so everything else is 0, 0, 0. It's black, right? So what we're going to do is change it to, say, 4, 4, 4. Now this nice dark gray. Oh, you know, we can go darker. It's 2, 2, 2. There we go. All right, so now we've got these pieces of content that are they're kind of floating on this black background. All right, so but obviously I feel like we can make this a lot more interesting. So I'm thinking maybe what we should do here is add some what we could do here is add some sort of accent coloration. So maybe the page title. So let's go back to this concept that we had of these selectors being more complicated. Page head H1, right? So the H1's in page head. I think that could be a more interesting color. I think FAA might be interesting. It's like pink. There we go. I got a pink page type. All right, now that's looking a lot better, actually. Yeah, like I was thinking, like, oh, this really does not look good, and I know it's just a cheap example, but this really is something's looking wrong with it. But now it's looking a little better. Now it's looking a bit more like it really, like it could be a real page that someone actually made and said, oh, that's a good page. All right, so we've got this just sort of random hang off down at the bottom here. Just a quick way to fix that. Not really worrying about anything else. I can take the body tag and I can apply same as everything else. Make the body black. Okay, now we got this really nice looking thing. All right, so we've got this nice dark theme. It's easy on the eyes, it's nice and dark, and I don't have to stare at a stupid light theme anymore. Jeez. All right, so anyone talking in the chat? All right, so let's go to the chat. Key Bounce is watching at 125%. Key Bounce said, oh no, I use light mode for my computer. Don't tell me what my eyes work with. Let the user have their own colors. I am going to get to that. That is the next step with JavaScript, which unfortunately I don't think we're going to get to tonight. I meant to get to that tonight. But could you put a button for the user to push to change the background and its colors to different presets? You guys are asking about that. This is later on in the presentation was this, but I don't think we're going to get to that tonight, unfortunately. Tonight we're just going to have to go with the theme that I want. You can make your own pages. I mean, you should be making your own pages on your own end as you watch this. So, like, I would hope that y'all are understanding that you can put your own colors in these. Like, you don't have to put the colors that I'm putting. So please don't put the colors that I'm putting. You know, put colors that you like. You might decide that you like a light theme, and that's the thing. You can do a light theme. If you are constantly interrupting me on Discord, then you'd probably be keeping me more on track instead of going off on these weird tangents. Let's see. Is set up for their eyeballs. Well, yeah, you should assume that the user knows better than you, but I'm picking, stuff that I wanted to. So let's see, what else is there? Yeah, so in general, the computer is set up for the eyeballs of the monitor. Yeah. All I'm saying is what the trend has been, the solid trend has been that default is dark because people stare at monitors more often. All right. Let's see. Figured out as much as the time. This is okay. I don't know what's going on. Oh, you mean because that they were probably not going to get to some stuff. Yeah. It happens. The content took more time than I thought it would to go through. I want to say I've been running slow, but I don't think I've actually been going that slow tonight. I think it's just this content. I don't think I've ever quite sat down and done this particular type of class on this particular subject, so I was not aware of how long it would take. So now we know it's this long. I'm going to go move this 66 point over here because I like that better. All right, so we've got. All right, so just trying to make things laid out in such a way that I like it better. So now let's move on a little from the coloration. All right, so let's talk about different ways that we could display these. So how much more do we got here? I am going to show you one other positioning style. I'm not going to do all the things on this slide. I'm going to go show you what sticky positioning does, because that was the reason I wanted to do. That was the reason I wanted to do that top bar, was to show you guys. All right, so I'm getting some content divs with some fake content. All right, fake content. Whoop, wrong one. All right, so I got some fake content divs. This is really what it would look like, if you actually had stuff on the page, is it would actually like push that down to the bottom and look all nice. All right, so I need a little bit more for what I'm wanting to show you guys. All right. So let's say that the top bar here, let's say that this is so important that the people see that this top bar is here. Oh no, they've scrolled down past it, and they won't be able to navigate the website now because they've scrolled down past the top bar. The top bar might even be something for, it might even be something very important for the site or whatever. All right, so the top bar. So now I'm going to show you the sticky. This position is called the sticky position. Right? It's going to do a weird thing. If I can get it to do it. Okay. So, sticky positioning. Remember we were talking about sticky positioning. So stickily positioned elements scrolls with its container until the container reaches the top of the screen, right? At which point it keeps going, right? That's how it's supposed to work. That's how it works in this example on Mozilla Developer Network, right? So over here, we're going to first figure out why it's not doing exactly what I think it should do. All right, so over here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this top bar inside the page head, right? So that now it's going to be beneath the page title, which is too far down. Let me go in and change the height of this element, because clearly this element is part of the issue. Yeah. Whoops, I did something weird there. All right, and I may actually need to move the page head itself so that it's not, so that this works. Because remember, we need to have this in the front. Actually, the other thing we can do, I'm going to show you something else. All right, so I'm going to show you another thing you can do. Top bar. All right, so z-index 999. Okay, so I've given the top bar a z-index, and that puts it in front of everything else. So now here's the top bar. It's below this other stuff. All right, so let's see what's getting computed on this that's making the margins so crazy. Okay, the margin on an H1 is going to be like that. So what we want to do is we want to change the H1 margin to be... We want to change the margin on this to be, let's say... What did it go with over here? It's... Margin, block start, block end. Yeah, it's 21 pixels. So let's go with 8 pixels. That sounds like that'll work. It doesn't. It just needs to not touch the edges. There we go. So now we got the top bar. All right. Now we don't need to do too much with this. All right. All right, here we go. All right, so now let's see if I can figure out the sticky positioning, because I've done this before. I'm just trying to remember exactly how you're supposed to do it. All right, so when it's inline, it's inline. So the trick is to make it inline. All right, so we've positioned it properly in the inline. And now the positioning of it is sticky. So when it reaches that top and that left, it's supposed to stick to the top of the page, but I'm not seeing that happen. There's got to be some... There's got to be some like quirk of this that I'm just not remembering. Well, I'll show you the other one. I'm going to show you the other one that you can work with, because the other one is worth looking at. There's another one here. It's called... You shouldn't necessarily do this. I'm just showing it to you. So we got another one here called fixed. Fixed is an interesting one. Fixed position contents. So I just fixed both sidebars. They're both fixed now. Fixed position content does not move. It just stays where it is on the screen as you scroll past other things. which is really interesting in so many ways. You could do so many things with this, but the main point of this is that, hey, look, you've got content now that is fixed in one spot on the screen, and it moves with the screen. As you scroll down, it does not move around on the screen. It stays where it is. That's really useful if, say, one of these sidebars, if one of these sidebars was like the table of contents for a document, that would be really useful. I've seen a lot of them where they'll make one the table of contents and have it scroll alongside. You can put a div within this div that has its own scrolling applied to it, and then, you know, this scrolls around and then this doesn't, and then when you want to change things, when you want to go like quickly select things within a document, you can find it. I think Google Drive, Google Docs actually has that set up. Okay, so here's another one. Let's see. That's what I wanted to go over with that. So I'm going to move on from that. All right, so the two more things I want to talk about is just little things you can do to make the content, you know, quote unquote, pop, right? So here we have this, here we've got like, you know, this very, so we got these border effects, right, that we could possibly do. These are all very square. I think they'd look nicer if they weren't so square. So I can go into style and I can say, you know, that the right sidebar and left sidebar, or I can go to all the divs because I've got this thing that's for all the divs. And I think it's no longer, I think it's being overridden everywhere on the page, isn't it? Yeah, that's being overridden everywhere, so it doesn't matter if it's there or not. So radius, new tag, border radius. Actually, was not in the original specs of this. I'll make you happy. Yeah, I'll make it 4 point. There we go. It's 4 point. All right, so we've made it like that. Oh, that doesn't show up too well. Let's make it 12 point so that everyone can. Whoa. All right, so we've made it 12 point. Oops. I must have done something wrong. Okay. So we've made the border for everything 12 point, so that we've got all these rounded things. We've got this problem that this brings up because it makes the padding bad. It has these things sometimes intersect their own whatever, but we can fix that by just saying that, you know, that the content div should have some padding. There you go, now the content divs look a little nicer, except for the fact that they're over there. Let's see, how do you fix that again? I can fix that by just keep doing this. Just keep making them small. I'm making them smaller and smaller, just shrinking. This is not necessarily the way you want to figure out the spacing of things on your page. I'm just giving you guys examples because, hey, doesn't this kind of look like the beginnings of something you might put up as an actual like resume website? That's the point of this. All right, so we've got these margins. All right, let's do another effect. Let's talk about shadow effects. I want to say it's the box shadow CSS property, yes. All right, so you can do all sorts of stuff with it. So here this is on MDN. Here's the box shadow stuff. We can apply different colors to it. We can apply different sort of smoothing to it. We can apply all sorts of other stuff. Right now, I just want to give these like a shadow on the page. So let's do this. Let's copy what they've got right here. This looks good enough to me. Let's take these content divs and give them this sort of shadow. Let's make it a black shadow because it's a shadow. Let's keep most of their values. Let's keep their values, yeah. Let's keep all the values they've given it. And now we've got like these kind of shadow effects going on this thing. See, it even took into account the fact that we had rounded corners on that. You know, it might be slightly more interesting, you know, messing around with that, is if I made the offset like only 2 pixels. I made that 6. Alright, now see, that's a more subtle shadow effect. Subtle effects are often better, I've found. Alright, so let's do this. Let's do the sidebars now. Give them the same shadow. And now everything has this nice shadow on it. Okay, so all that's really doing is it's just making another shape beneath it and then just applying that sort of blending to it. That's what a shadow does. It can be used for a bunch of different things. Let's see, how do you do multiple ones? I know you can also do multiple ones. So okay. So let's say that I want the entire thing to have this sort of like shadow effect around the entire thing. I can do this. Where's the content? Okay, so there's more shadowing. All right. So yeah, there's the shadow works. Look it up if you want to use it. Let's see, we could give some transparency to this stuff. Let's go and do something with gradient backgrounds real quick. All right, so CSS has this thing that newer versions of CSS have added this thing that lets you do gradients. So instead of the background being a solid color, we can say that it's a gradient, right? So yeah, let's make this crazy rainbow effect in the background that they've got in their example. Let's just go straight up lift that and use that. So the one content div that we had that has the background color, let's do this for the background. Let's make the background itself a linear gradient of just red, green, blue, red, green, blue. There we go. All right. How does that look again? Oh yeah, you gotta also put in. No, I'm not gonna bother. I'm just gonna do that. Let's do that. This is stupid and insane, but we're gonna do it. Okay, cool. This is rainbows. The background is now rainbows. Okay, it's nice and rainbowy. Well, you can't necessarily see it because it's behind so many things. But we could do something stupid. We could always do something stupid. You know? There's always an opportunity to do something stupid. First off, we can also make the background scroll or not scroll. What was this? There's a way to make it scroll or not scroll. CSS backgrounds. There's a way to make it not scroll. I think this will make this effect look better if I do it like this. So I'm going to do it like this. Come on, where is that at? Okay, values. Position, background position, that was it. Man, I cannot remember that there is a way to make it do all this neat scrolling stuff, and now I really want to do it because that would really make this one effect that I wanted to show. What? Background attachment, what? Oh, right, it's the attachment tag. Right, they call it attachment because it's where it's attached. All right, so it's attached, so it's fixed. Now the background will not scroll with my scrolling up and down. All right, so now this will make this next thing I want to try make more sense when I do it. All right, so I'm going to do this. So you can give an alpha value to your backgrounds, right? So we go with, we do this. So now I notice that I've gone into decimal mode, right? I've done the wrong one. All right, so now we can go into sort of a decimal mode. I'll make the background color 0, 0, 0, and then 192 I think should actually be a good way to do this. You know, 192, always something above 128 because it's from 0 to 255 that you're setting these at. So I'm doing like a transparent background or a semi-transparent background. I've done it wrong. I should have looked it up. See, this is me getting impatient. Oh, okay. It's not. I was wrong. It's not a decimal there. Or it's not that. These are all 0 to 255, but this is actually I don't know why, but it's actually like a percentage or a decimal. That seems silly to me, but I'm going to go with it because I don't have a choice because that's I'm not the one who makes the rules. I just have to teach them. Okay, so now you see what I was going for. So we've got this content, and if I smoothly scroll around, you can see that rainbow through the back of this. So now it's like these are like little black panes of glass or something on the page. And we're just kind of scrolling up and down through them. All right, so the one last thing I want to get to tonight, and next class we will go really deep into JavaScript. We will just fire hard into JavaScript and talk about JavaScript for hours. The main thing, the last thing I want to get into tonight is that you can do something called a pseudo class or state. And we need to get to the state of these things. So I'm going to show you first off this background color thing. Okay, so all these features that I just showed you actually work really well if you also combine them with something called the hover state. I don't remember if I can do what I'm about to try, but I'm going to try it real quick. Because if I can show you this way, then this actually looks really good. Because I've done this on a few projects. All right, so yes, okay. So the hover state works by the browser is always checking, and it can detect what elements your cursor is over. So if I'm over like one of these things, it knows. So what I can do is make elements that when they are being hovered over look different. So now I'm going to make some little things. I make these versions. Now remember, CSS, when you do the same thing, it overrides, but it doesn't necessarily, it overrides what you've put in there before if you put it in there again. So this is going to override this, but this in itself is not overriding all of this. It's just saying that, okay, in this case, override this thing with this thing. And this thing right here is an opaque object. So now all of these objects are opaque, right? So now let's imagine that I have some buttons in this top bar. This is where this really becomes incredibly useful, is with buttons. This is really the major use of this. Okay, so let's say I've got these spans. All right, I've got these spans, and I'm going to do this with them. Bing, 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 bing. That is not good form at all. I should not do that. Let's do this. All right, so yeah, span, 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 span. Should put all these on their own line. All right, so I'm going to put these buttons, the spans, on their own line. All right. So I got top bar dot button, right? So here we've got, copy this, top bar dot btn, right? And then we want that to have, we already know we want this to have dot btn. And all right, there's got to be a space in between these because this is within a thing. Hover. So let's imagine that these are links. I'm not going to put links on them, but let's imagine they are, because that's the point of this little bit that we're about to do. All right, so I used a span. So what am I going to do? Display type. The way it's going to display, I want it to display, this is an inline block, right? And I want to give it I want it to give it 100% of that line that it's on. And let's give it a background color. RGB. Let's make them all blue, right? Got these blue backgrounds. Okay, we got these 5 buttons up here that have blue backgrounds. They don't necessarily look great, but you know, that's the way that they are right now. Now let's see, how can we actually make this look a little better? Border left. Oh yeah. I'm gonna make it gray actually, but gray is better. Let's see, RGB. So let's make the background color on hover into AF for AF. Oops, not my mistake. All right, so this is looking like a crazy rainbowed out page, I know already, but you know, the idea here is not to show you what should be done, but what can be done. I know this is starting to look like someone's like 90s website or like someone's MySpace page or something, but the point is that the way that your buttons should look, this is something called responsive design. The way that your buttons should look is that they should really, whenever someone scrolls over, like puts their mouse over interactive content, you shouldn't necessarily do what I did here where the scrolling over the non-interactive element does that. But you should always have your menu buttons, anything that's a link or whatever, anything that's going to do something when you click it, should always have a hover effect that makes it clear that hey, you hovering over this is meaningful. You clicking on this is going to be a meaningful decision. So then you click it and then something happens. In any case. So I'm not going to get into the other stuff that we would have done tonight because obviously it's been 3 hours of a 2 hour. No, it hasn't been 3 hours. It's been 2.5 hours. But obviously we've been going for a little while. So I'm going to go ahead and call this, the now. But I will say thank y'all for attending. I will take any last questions. If anyone wants to get on the voice now and talk, we can do that. I will go on the thing and I will look at y'all's responses to the other stuff. So let's see. We got our chat. Can I pop this out? Yes, I can. All right, so we got the YouTube chat. Let's talk to people here. Don't assume all God colors were fun on all modes. Yeah. Make sure if you do this sort of thing, if you notice I automatically, until the very end with this, because I didn't take any time with it, I was leaning towards, they've got to be white text on black or black text on white. Always make sure you've got good contrast between your text and your background, obviously. And then your borders can be a more mid-tone. But anything you need the person to be able to make out really clearly, you want to have a lot of contrast with whatever is behind it. What else is there? Alright, yeah, people like the gradients. That's good that you like the gradients. The gradients are, like I said, they're not, like, okay, so this website, this open source web design, this is an old website, and all of these designs are like over 10 years old. Like when I was learning web design, when I was getting my web design certification, this was one of the site. This was like the site that we were looking at for examples, and I remember I remember all of these designs. I remember messing with all of these designs. They all existed here. None of these are new. That was over 10 years ago. So this website is like designed from the 2000s. So these buttons are actually, they're not CSS gradients or rounding. These are actually, I think this is just so silly. These are actually images. These are actually little images that they put on their page. See? So these are actually little images on the page that are in front of the other stuff. Everything here is just images instead of actual gradients. And nowadays you can do rounded corners and you can do gradients, and you don't need to have images to do that. That would be silly nowadays. This thing right here that was also very popular back in the 2000s, I think you could also do with gradients. Nowadays, if you see this has this design where it's got these sort of like vertical lines. that's a bit harder to do with pure CSS. That is a good idea if you want to make a background that just kind of has more interesting nature. This is the alternative, is to have some sort of repeated little pattern. And, you know, vertical or diagonal bars, these diagonal lines are really a good way to do that. That is something I would recommend looking into. Especially for little accents, like if you had like titles on these things, I would say, you know, put that there, or maybe like the background of the page title could be that. Don't be afraid to play with the idea of using more interesting images either. Let's say I wanted to see this. Let's say I'm gonna break the rules. I'm break the rules. Everybody, I'm breaking the rules. Not allowed to do this. It's a criminal act. You're all a part of this. I'm roping you in. Oops. We are not afraid. We are not afraid. Afraid to use images. Okay, the borders of this made it all wacky, but see, you can put the page title up there and have an image on the page title. It's very common. I mean, let's go look at... Let's go look at Equestria Daily real quick. How are they doing this? Okay, they've got a parallax scroll. I always think that this is such a nice top of the page right here. Look at this. They've got this kind of gentle parallax scrolling on the top with this stuff. So it's like it's not all scrolling at once. They've got this very clever thing that they're doing. And wow, they have a lot more ads than I remember them having. But yeah, I think Equestria Daily is going. And also, look, they've got that responsive design. Where as I scroll sideways, I see this. This is a CSS effect that they are making these things appear and disappear as they are scrolled over. That was something I wanted to show you guys tonight, but I'm not going to get to that. That'll be next class. But yeah, I hope you guys have learned a lot today. Like you can see what I'm talking about with this reactive design, that you want hover to be that way it is. And that's JavaScript right there. This what's going on here is JavaScript. Fancy banner. See how this changes when I click it? It was changing. Jeez. Okay, see, yeah, this is what I'm talking about. This is JavaScript right here. That is changing the actual way that the page is functioning when I do that. It's actively changing something on the page that goes beyond just, oh, you've got your cursor hovered over this, so we're going to do this now. Anyways. Yeah, I always think that Equestria Daily has a really good setup here. My one issue is that this banner actually is this site is so old that this banner up here that has the multi-layered parallaxing, that is programmed in JavaScript and it should be CSS. That's my one issue, but that's the thing. This website is like what, 10 years old now? When did this website come out? I want to say 2011. Yeah, this is over 10 years old, this website. And the thing about it is good design will always kind of hold up. So you've got like, yeah, this is good design. This multicolored thing here that every button is easy to spot from the others. And then you scroll over them and it's very clear that you can interact with them because they all do this thing where they're, you know, they're really highlighting as you scroll over them. You've got this thing here that kind of transitions downward. It kind of animates downward, and it lets you do this real-time change. I don't see anything else to really say about this. They've got, you know, a sidebar over here, but it doesn't crowd out their main content, which is all the stuff they want to show you, and it's, you know, it's on the right. You can put it on the left or the right, whichever you prefer. And you know, and these are basically the same thing. These little divs here, that's basically the same thing as these divs here. So pretty much all of this, yeah, it all is the kind of stuff that I'm talking about with this. And that's what I meant by, oh, you guys are going to notice this and see how familiar this is, that these all look the same as what you're used to, because this is a very common blog. This is a very common way to lay out a website. Anyways, well, if there's no other questions, if no one's going to come on The Voice and ask me anything or come talk to me anywhere else, I should not be scrolling through my private messages. Oh, I really should not be scrolling through other servers. Anyways, so yeah, that's it for this. Because no one's saying anything, so nobody's asking any more questions. So I guess we're done. Bye. Y'all can let me just leave on the note of this. This was all the stuff I was going to go through. This is going to be next time. We're going to talk about light switches and auto building content and all that. So yeah, goodbye everybody. That's it for this stream. That's it. We're done. Bye. You don't have to be here anymore. You can be finished. You can call that done. Say, hey, we're done. You can walk away, and then you don't have to be here anymore. That's how it goes. That's just how it goes. So you can do what you want to do. You can believe what you want to do. You know, you can read what you want to read, believe what you want to believe.